computer. Hello, Steve. Can you hear me? Nope. I think we're maybe getting there. Make it larger.
Hello, Ron.
Good morning. We don't have the owl.
You.
What's that?
I hear you.
Okay. Do you see me?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
I see you.
Good. Glad I could get in to join.
Yeah, we don't have the owl today. It's not in the room, and I whisked down the hall. It's being used in the room next to the chapel by another class for a presentation.
Oh, that happens.
So,
Stuff happens. It's okay.
let's see. Try to make the screen larger. I am recording on this computer.
Great.
Trying to remember how to make the Microsoft presentation larger.
There you go.
Oops. Slideshow. Let's see what happens if we hit that. Current slide. Well, okay. Well, it's showing at least on the big screen for those in the class here. So that's good. And you folks, Susan, Steve, you can see at least a readable version on your screen.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. We can make it work.
What about at the top right? It looks like there are a couple of little boxes up next to the X. If you hit that to those two little boxes, would that expand it?
Let's see. Well, it's showing large size on the screen here in the room.
Oh, okay,
So everybody can read it real well. So
got it. Okay.
I think we better. Okay. Got a few handouts this morning. Take one of these and pass it on. And we've got two, three. We've got 4 copies of this, which is not nearly enough. Wait, here's another one. Here's a couple more. Here's another one. Okay. And you know me, always passing around books. And there's a DVD here too as well. Just to look at. Okay, everybody. Well, welcome to Contemporary Issues. We've got two people on the screen here, at least on my screen, I can see them. Steve Basca and Susan Sutton, respectively in Costa Rica. That's Steve and Vicky. And Susan, of course, in Canada, the province of Ottawa. No, wait, that's you're muted. I can't hear you, Susan. Let's see.
Okay, province of Ontario and city of Toronto.
Okay. All righty. Well, good to have you both from international domains this morning. That's unusual to have two different international sites coming in. Okay.
Yes.
Do we have any special announcements on this wonderful Father's Day? Yeah. Okay. Okay, this morning's topic. Then
Continuing coverage of the Johnny Depp Amber Heard trial while somebody's stealing democracy.
okay. All right, so we're going to be talking this morning about international attacks and difficulties that democracy is having. Okay, one of the organizations that I recommend that you go to on your computer, freedomhouse.org. It's I think it's a US government sponsored program that just looks at democracy across the world. Looks at, and again, that's on the top of this slide, the address, but it looks at aspects of democracy in different countries in the world and keeps a running tally to see if they're kind of going up or down. And in your handout this morning, the first page of the handout shows a bunch of countries. The second page of the handout shows scores. The far right column shows a democracy score. The biggest possible score is a perfect 7. The worst score is, of course, a 0. You want to have the highest number possible to have a better democracy. And this chart we've passed out, and again, this comes out of a Freedom House publication, rates these countries in, count how many columns there are. What, about 7 or 8 different columns? Rates the countries relative to these democracy measures in 7 or 8 different categories, and then proceeds to give it an overall rating to the country. And you can see what country there is on. Estonia. That's rather impressive for a country that came out from under the Soviet Empire not too long ago. And some countries that are way down on the list don't rank very high. Also on the second page shows the identification of freedom for the different columns that they rate. And again, we could have a whole lesson on this, but if you want to look at it at a later date, it shows how we rate democracy, or at least how Freedom House rates democracies. Okay, I don't know if anybody watches Stars, but there was a mini series with Julia Roberts that just finished up last week. It was called Gaslit. I don't know if anybody saw it, but it was a program that reviewed the life of Mrs. Mitchell, John Mitchell's wife, about 6 episodes, and essentially went through the Watergate trauma. For those of us old enough to remember, there's some people in the class that fortunately are young enough and don't remember it, but I think more of us do than don't. But there's also a book that's just come out. In fact, the handout, the one handout is the foreword from the 50th anniversary edition of All the President's Men. And I've also passed out the DVD. Yeah, the foreword of that book is what you have there in that one handout, and it's worth reading. And it does look at some of the parallels that Woodward and Bernstein make between Nixon and Trump. Tremendous parallels in terms of history repeating itself. Sad but true. Okay. Glad to know they're still going after 50 years. Some other references, and we passed a few of the books around, from the magazine American Scholar, The Global Attack on Democracy is one of the articles in that. And it shows 2 of the people in the world who are not helping democracy. Putin and the premier of Russia, or the premier of China. Of course, of the 2, by far, the person that's fighting democracy very hard is Putin. Also, a book I recommend is Anne Applebaum's book. She's won the Pulitzer Prize, Twilight of Democracy, her book, The Seductive Lure of Authoritarianism. Also, the book, How Democracies Die. This is a bestseller, and it should be out there. If we didn't, yeah, it's being passed around. A couple other books that Authoritarian Nightmare, and believe it or not, John Dean of Watergate fame co-authored this with Bob Altemeyer. And then Adam Schiff's latest book, Midnight in Washington, How We Almost Lost Our Democracy and Still Could. Okay, we go back to the birth of our wonderful country. Representatives of the colonies met there in Philadelphia. And as they wrapped up all the hard work they'd done on the Constitution, lady talked to Ben Franklin. And she said to him, "Well, doctor, what have we got? Republic or a monarchy?" And Ben Franklin replied back, "Republic, if you can keep it." Ben Franklin was very adamant that just establishing a democracy and birthing a democracy doesn't ensure its continuation forever. It has to be like a garden, tended to, reflected upon, taken care of, and kept free from attacks. And in fact, in the first page of that article, the Bernstein article, there's a quote from George Washington. And it quotes him as saying he was very concerned that you got to protect this democracy. Just because we've created a constitution and a trifecta government doesn't mean it's going to stay there forever. He was fearful of unscrupulous people who would try to abuse and attack democracy.
And called it a government. And it truly was. In the history of the world, not the
Absolutely. The book on democracy talks about democracy has some disappointments. Often it does not satisfy a desire that people have to belong to a unique community, a superior community, a closed community. People want to belong to a movement that they feel like they can latch into and become part of. And it makes them feel like they're in the club, the organization. And we see this with both, certainly with religion. People want to believe that their group is probably often superior to others, and they've got all the answers, and you're special if you belong to the particular religion. And we find the same thing with much nationalism and political activity. People want to feel like, you know, they're part of the best. They're part of the group.
Democracy.
Yep. The second bullet says democracy has disadvantage in that it tends to work slowly, requires communication, cooperation, acceptance of diversity of thought and culture, whereas authoritarianism is a more simplistic appeal. Doesn't require as much tolerance of other ideas and tribes, and has more of a forced unity. Yep. I don't know if anybody saw it it was on Stars or whatever, but Kirsten Dunst did a one-year miniseries called On Becoming a God in Central Florida. And it was a good, she got into it was kind of like a religious Amway organization called FAM, and all these people were getting into it, and it stressed free enterprise and business development, individuality, and also it had a patriotic and a political arm to it. Pretty good show, and too bad it ended after season 1 because of COVID. All right. As the Western democracies are rising to defend the Ukraine, some of the democracies in the same European area are having difficulties. And one of the worst examples is Turkey with Viktor Orban. Not Turkey, Hungary with Orban. Turkey is also having difficulties. But authoritarianism is on the rise. There's no doubt about it. Here's a chart from the Freedom Group, and it shows where freedom is on the rise and fall. Not free is the purple you see there. Of course, that's Russia, a bit of Africa. Free is the, what do you call that color? Turquoise. And then the partly free is kind of the yellowish. And right now we can see that Ukraine is in the balance. It could certainly fall either way.
Central America.
Let's go back. Yeah, India's having struggles too. Authoritarian. Mexico, yeah. Take a look at the, again, go to the Freedom House site, and you can analyze a lot of these. Okay. Moving ahead. Freedom House report is the latest one on this last year, 2021. It said authoritarian leaders are increasingly collaborating with one another. They're getting ideas from one another. Hey, this idea worked in Hungary. This idea worked in Turkey. Let's try it here. See if we can make it work. There's been a 16-year decline in democracy that's affected all geographic regions and democratic indicators. And in red there on the bottom of this slide, the largest 10-year score declines, this is declines over a period of a decade, by the Freedom House are shown to be in Hungary, Nauru, Poland, India, and the United States. The loss of, yeah. Okay, and again, here's another page out of the Freedom Status Report. Ecuador and Peru improved from partly free to free after they completed successful election and orderly transitions of power. Where could there possibly be a problem with orderly transition of power? Tunisia declined from free to partly free due to their president's anti-democratic power grab. Guinea and Haiti were downgraded from partly free to not free because of a military coup and the president's assassination in those countries, respectively. Okay, there's one slide that I hope really stands out in this presentation. It's this one here. Not because we've got Green Lantern there, who's my childhood hero, but a quote by John Adams. And if you look at John Adams' statement, this is an ideal that I put way up there on my important positions. He said, public virtue depends on private virtue. There must be positive passion for the public good, public interest, honor, power, and glory at the mind of the people. Public passion must be superior to all private passions. Men must be ready, this you got to emphasize, men and women must be ready to, and happy to sacrifice private pleasures, passions, interest, dearest friendships, and connections when they stand in competition with the rights of society. In other words, he said, you got to be willing to have people reject you. You've got to be willing to take a pocketbook hit, and you've got to have the courage to stand up for what's right, no matter what it costs you. And this, of course, is my personal opinion, but Liz Cheney is showing right now.
Yeah.
She's taken a tremendous hit. She'll probably get wiped out of office and be sent to retirement. But I have to admire this lady because she's ready to sacrifice her political, probably some monetary and power, to stand up for what's right. John Adams said it so very well. We need this. Okay, Mhm. Mhm. Okay, some democracy teardowns. These are three things that are often done to tear down democracy. One, treating your rivals as enemies. In the case of Putin, Alexei Navalny, of course, stood out. He was a political opponent of Putin. And what did Putin do to him? Poisoned him. Came within a flea flicker of killing him. Here's a before and after picture after he recovered from the poisoning. But Navalny is now in prison. He had gone back to Russia. He's a political opponent of Putin, and he's a guy with enough. He just wanted to say, "I'll give my life," basically, to try to oppose this man. I think he could have, but he made this decision. So, in an ominous speech, it said, Putin likened opponents to gnats who try to weaken the country. And Putin has been a horrific example of somebody that takes their rivals as enemies and tries to tear them apart. And of course, we saw this at the 2016 Republican convention, people holding "lock her up" signs, chanting "lock her up." Again, here's an example of treating your rival as a bitter enemy. Two other democracy tear downs. Gee, this couldn't happen, could it? Threatening to reject outcomes of elections. And then once you get into power, trying to weaken, you want to try to weaken the court, intelligence services, and the ethics offices. I like that cartoon there. Horton hears a whistleblower. And of course, I enjoyed James Comey's book on a higher loyalty. He certainly stressed what Jim's comment was, that he felt it was up to politicians to stand for country first,
Yeah,
not
but we'll
themselves.
do that, so.
He shit in his hat. He pissed on himself.
Okay. Freedom House report said during the Cold War, coups accounted for 3/4 of the democratic breakups. Now, of those countries mentioned, history has moved on. Some of them had their democracy torn down rather badly, And several of them have managed to pull out of it, recover, and get back to somewhat of a democratic state. But that list is pretty long of countries that have had coups, military coups. The book also, or the Freedom House also mentions that democracies can also become disabled or die at the hand of elected leaders. Some examples, Venezuela under Hugo Chavez, and of course Hitler in 1933. And then some of the countries that have had this case of leaders taking them down. Georgia, we don't mean the state of Georgia, we mean the country of Georgia. Hungary, Nicaragua, Peru, Philippines, Poland, Russia, Sri Lanka, Turkey, and Ukraine. Ukraine right now is in the balance, although we can say Zelensky has done a fabulous job. He's restored democracy. The question is, can it hold against this horrific attack by Putin? Okay, democratic essentials. You need, if you want to have a strong democracy, you need a system of checks and balances. No one person or legislative branch can take thing. You need rule of law. We're going to talk about that a little more. And you need protections of the rights and liberties of all. Hopefully the Supreme Court plays a role in that. There's a couple books I don't know if most of you have heard of the term unitary executive. This is something that's kind of gained, this is a concept, the unitary executive theory. It means, and boiling it down, it means giving way more power to the executive branch, to the president, than the other two branches. This has been a trend that's been going on for the last 20 years. But there's a couple of good books there on the unitary executive. It's the theory of constitutional law, holding that the president controls the entire executive branch. And if you look at how many federal employees are under the different branches of government, almost all of them fall under the executive branch. Congress has very little control of most of the federal bureaus and offices. And we're drifting more towards more of a unitary presidency. Okay, again, there's our three branches of government: legislative, executive, and judicial. I also want to mention there's a great course, I should have brought it today, that talks about American government that I recommend. One of the problems we're having right now is our checks and balances has gotten a little bit out of balance, more than a little bit. The fact that we've got 50% of the US population represented by 18 senators, and the other 50% represented by 82 senators, statewide. You got 9 states that hold 50% of the US population. Gerrymandering. There's a little movement going on right now to try to reduce gerrymandering. A lot of fights in the last year over it, but it's by no means eliminated. Gerrymandering is going strong. Good example is North Carolina. In the last election, if you counted all the votes for House of Representatives cast in North Carolina, there were more votes for Democrats than Republicans. The way the lines are drawn in North Carolina, there are 10 Republican districts and 3 Democrats, despite the vote being very close to 50-50. An example that's worth looking at also, reaching well back into American history, is Andrew Jackson. The Supreme Court ruled that the Cherokees had every right to their land. And Andrew Jackson just said, tough luck, Supreme Court. I don't care about your ruling. I'm going to throw these Cherokees out of the southeastern part of the United States. Good book to read is Trail of Tears, Rise and Fall of the Cherokee Nation. It just shows that things can happen and the balance of power can get off track. Okay, we're going to talk about rule of law. Let's see who's got a little Southern heritage and remembers what movie did this picture and quote come from. What we're dealing with here is a total lack of respect for the law. Sheriff Buford T. Justice. Remember that movie? Played by Jackie Gleason in Smokey and the Bandit. If you want a good Friday night movie to watch, I'd recommend that one. It's got great humor. Smokey and the Bandit.
Burt Lancaster, not Burt Reynolds.
Sally Field and Burt Reynolds, Jackie Gleason. You'll enjoy that one. And the essence of rule of law, if you're going to have a good democracy, you've got to have what I call respect for rule of law. That means everything from out here at the intersection, you see a stop sign, you say, I'm going to stop. A red light, I'm going to stop. You're following the rule of law. The person that doesn't respect rule of law says, there's no police I can see, the heck with it, I'm running the light. We see that all the time. But democracies really depend on people having a willingness to respect the rule of law without court orders or the logic in the second bullet. If I keep filing appeals and hiring lawyers, by the time they convict me, I'll be retired and my term will be up. Jim.
Slow down and stop. That's the law. Slow down and stop. That's the legislation. Most drivers, when the amber comes on, they speed up to get through it.
Yep.
All drivers. One thing that appalled me is
2016. Mhm. Yeah. Right. Yeah.
I know.
He thought it
One reason.
Whoa. Mm. Mhm. Okay, so protecting the rights and liberties for all is another thing that has to be done to keep a democracy strong. You've got to keep voting rights protected. Get a load of this. This is not fiction. The latest Texas law makes it a felony, not a misdemeanor, a felony for a public official to just send someone a mail-in ballot application if they didn't request it. Can you imagine that? You're a felon because you sent an application to someone. Whew. Gerrymandering must be eliminated, and our country has a long way to go on that. Judicial appointees must look out for all tribes, not just their usually, white male. There was a bumper sticker, white Christian native born males have nothing to fear from us. There's also in the internet, the Texas government limited election drop boxes to 1 per county. A sprawling state.
One used one Dropbox. It's huge.
Try to make it tough. Make people drive 40 miles through urban traffic to get to that drop box. Okay. I caught this in the news in the last few weeks. North Korea is punishing youngsters wearing tight jeans and dyeing their hair. Of course, if you get caught with tight jeans or dyeing your hair, you get drawn into a little courtroom, and your parents have to show up, and you have to repent and promise you won't do it again. Okay, key techniques in athletics and politics. If you want to try to tear down democracy, you capture the referees, you sideline the key players, and you rewrite the rules to tilt the playing field against opponents. I got to point out this one. This actually happened in 1947. Bill Veeck was team, the Cleveland Indians, now the Cleveland Guardians, were playing another team, and he decided that he had a lot of power hitters that could really hit the ball down this one line well. He said, I'm just going to move the fence now for that day. Yeah, just you can see it, but you can see him putting in the temporary fence. Move the put the looks like it's, I can't tell if it's the right or probably the left field wall. Bring it in to try to help his team, who had a lot of power hitters that hit the ball that way. Does anybody remember this? Tanya Harding? Yeah, now there's a case of disabling the opponent to try to take him out. Capture the referees. We saw Trump doing this. He immediately sought to ensure the heads of the intelligence agencies, including the FBI, CIA, the NSA, were personally loyal to him. He dismissed Comey, who was FBI director. This had only been done once before in the 82-year FBI history. And in that case, it involved ethical violations, and the decision to remove the FBI director was bipartisan. And of course, Trump attempted to establish personal relationships with the Manhattan-based U.S. attorney, whose money laundering investigations threatened to reach some of Trump's friends. Okay, some good books to read on that. James Comey's books. Capturing the referees. Attorney General Jeff Sessions was attacked by Trump, and Robert Mueller threatened with firing. Trump threatened to break up the Ninth Circuit of U.S. Court. And of course, we all know what Trump thought of Vindman and the whistleblowers. Comey's fears were correct. Comey told Trump he would be reliable, with reliable meaning to tell him the truth, but Trump wanted more. I need loyalty. I expect loyalty. Okay. Another thing you try to do is sideline key players. Repeated accusations were made that the New York Times and CNN were dispensing fake news. During the 2016 campaign, Trump threatened Jeff Bezos, Washington Post, and Amazon with antitrust action. An international example, Ecuadorian President Rafael Correa used this approach in filing multi-million-dollar lawsuits and jailing of journalists. Okay, and then, of course, knocking out the opposition. One of the worst cases of this was in Hong Kong recently. In January of 2021, 53 pro-democracy activists and other folks were arrested by the security department, and China basically put in a law in Hong Kong saying, if you're going to run in the election there, you had to first be screened by the government and approved as a patriot. If you didn't pass the screening, you couldn't run. So there was a clear case of a sham election in Hong Kong. And of course, Russia, they had a horrific sham election in September of 2021. Nicaragua had one in November of last year, and then, of course, the Hong Kong example. Okay. Tilting the playing field, voter suppression methods. We mentioned a few of these. Voter roll purges, registration complexity, eliminate automatic and same-day registration, rigid ID requirements, 1 day in-person only and blocking of early voting, fewer voting locations, little or no mail-in balloting,
Mm-hmm.
poll taxes.
Birds.
Hey, guys.
Here's the authoritarian report that the Freedom House put down. And here in this 2-page example in their documentation, they showed countries that had undergone a democratic decline or even elimination, and looked to see which one of these 3 techniques they'd use: capturing referees, sidelining players, changing rules. And we see, and then the eventual fate. We noticed there in Italy, Silvio tried some stuff, but he didn't play these 3 techniques much, and the regime did end up being democratic. But this page and the next one show how some of these different techniques were applied. Interestingly enough, there in Russia, the 3rd line down, Putin basically worked with just number 2, sidelining players, poisoning, arresting, taking out the opposition. And of course, Venezuela under Hugo Chavez played all 3 of those cards. Okay. We're now going to look at the litmus tests for an autocrat. Here's 4 things to look for, and this is stressed in that book, How Democracies Die. The author said, look for these 4 things in any country in the world to see if the democracy is kind of getting put under severe attack. Number 1, weak commitment to democratic rules of the game, questioning the legitimacy of the electoral process.
Mhm.
Interestingly enough, until Trump, no major presidential candidate cast doubt on the democratic system since 1860. 2, deny legitimacy of opponents.
Mhm.
Remember, they tried to say Barack Obama wasn't born in the United States. He was born in Kenya. And then, of course, Hillary was attacked as a criminal, and it was suggested that she be jailed. Another thing, 3, toleration or encouragement of violence. For any of you that watched some of the PBS specials on the rise of fascism in Europe and other places, one of the things you really look out for is tolerating or encouraging violence, particularly political expression. There were what's known as the black shirts in Italy under
Mhm.
Mussolini. There were the brown shirts in Germany. There were both left and right-wing paramilitary groups in Brazil in the early 60s that went beating up people, and worse, killing them. Notice that Trump called out some people at some of his rallies saying, get that guy over there and somebody punch him out and I'll pay your legal bill. Remember that? Yeah. An interesting quote of Trump. He said, even in elementary school, I was a very aggressive kid. In the 2nd grade, I actually gave a teacher a black eye. I punched my music teacher because I didn't think he knew anything about music, and I almost got expelled. I'm not proud of that, but it's clear evidence that even early on, I had a tendency to stand up and make my opinions known in a very forceful way.
You too can grow up and be president. Unbelievable.
Also looking at respect for law, what if Mike Pence had said, no, I'm not going to certify this? Well, legal scholars say, well, it would have gone to court and they would have flipped it. But the big question is, how long would it have taken the legal process to have undone that? Could they have done it in 3 or 4 days? Would it have taken months, even a year? Therein lies the difficulty with what happens if you don't have respect for rule of law. If you say, I'll just do what I want, by the time the legal part gets through, it's years later or months later, or yeah, right, yeah, yeah. The call he made to Georgia, find me another, 11,800 votes. It's gone to a grand jury, but it's still churning its way through the legal system. Again, you need rule of law. You need people that will obey the law without being threatened with legal action. Yeah. There was a touch of that in New Mexico last week. There were 3 New Mexico election board people that said no, they weren't going to certify. This was just a primary in New Mexico. One county, and the 3 officials said, no, we're not going to certify the vote. One lady said, I just know in my heart that this isn't good. Yeah. Fortunately, it did flip into the court, and the court did force them to certify within a couple days, within about 48 hours. But you worry about that. Right. What if the Lightning, who lost to our Avs, would have said, and immediately when they lost last night, we were cheated, we think the referees were bribed or whatever else. There was a magnetic deflector on our puck down there at the other end. Yeah.
Mhm.
Um, um, how many-
Only. Well, even in Colorado, I think you can. Yeah, some
well, I don't
elections
mean
only, but
they're elected.
I'd have to run to them. There's a lot of states where there's virtually no mail-in ballot. There's a few cases where they often allow overseas or military personnel to turn in a mail-in ballot. Or if you've got a certified handicap of certain kinds. But often some states have some rules that are terribly restrictive so that the quote average person cannot mail in a ballot.
I think because
Yeah, agree. Again, I'm an idealist. I'm a dreamer, like John Lennon's song, Imagine. Every time we turn, I like this quote by Robert Kennedy. Every
Mhm.
time we turn our heads the other way, we see the law flouted. We tolerate what we know to be wrong, close our eyes and ears to the corrupt because we are too busy or too frightened. Fail to speak up and speak out. We strike a blow against freedom, decency, justice, and democracy.
Mhm.
Harvey's sermon this morning
Mhm.
pretty much said a good bit of that. Few will have the greatness to bend history itself. But each of us can work to change a small portion of events, and the total of all those acts will be written in the history of this generation. So that's just encouragement for all of us to get involved, not give up, not get discouraged. Get out there, keep working, trying to spread the right message, declare that you want the truth and justice prevail, and to work for it.
Point of view and status, current status of the Republican Party. Now, I'm a person who is liberal. Within both parties, there were liberal and conservative elements. And they worked out a lot of this,
Hmm.
within the party. It strengthened the country. Party came along where there's no compromise. The party has
Respecting norms. Constitution must be protected by political parties, ordinary citizens. If norms are trashed and the laws only obeyed if swift enforcement measures can be applied, democracy will suffer. So again, we need to respect norms, accept fair votes, not play dirty pool. Interestingly enough, in that book on the Watergate scandal, it's over there, the 50th anniversary issue, one more book down, All the President's Men. In fact, in the opening forward, it talks about some of the things they did to Edmund Muskie to derail his campaign. They actually planted somebody high up in the Muskie campaign who was passing all the info the other direction and sabotaging things, frankly, stepping over the line, doing things, sending out false letters, statements, et cetera, et cetera. Okay. Balancing individual freedom and egalitarianism. We're going to close and open up more discussion now. Quote, what gives me hope is that in spite of these declines, global demand for freedom and democracy remains as strong as ever. Quote from Bromowitz of the Freedom House. So the fight is on between anti-democracy and democracy all over the world. There's hope. Look at how hard the people of Ukraine are fighting, dying in hundreds. I think they say Ukraine's probably losing, 100 men a day and women just in the military ranks, trying to fight for their freedom. So something to offend everybody. Comments here today.
big country.
eliminating all the
Mhm.
naysayers, firing generals,
Mhm.
getting rid of the people
Mhm.
that don't support him,
Mhm.
loyalists, et cetera.
Mhm.
And it's just, I mean, clear that unless something is done about this, this is not going to stop in a few weeks or months.
Yeah. He'd like to get back Latvia, Estonia, the Baltic states. He'd like to attack Finland, frankly. He could.
You know, I think you-
Yeah, I'm also worried about it because they are so vulnerable to following these authoritarian leaders. Their
Yeah,
history.
that's-
Yeah. There's another book by Anne Applebaum. One of the books, she wrote one of the books on freedom. She's got another book on the domination of Eastern Europe by Russia in the post-World War II era. She talks about how Russia moved into, Hungary, Poland, Czechoslovakia, on, and how these dictators have found methods to really keep the masses under control. It's almost like the plantation owners in the South were, with a small number of overseers, able to keep hundreds of slaves under their power and in shackles.
Read a book there.
Okay. We can't hear what the people are saying. So
What's that say? 36 out of 40?
yeah, slides. We can't hear ourselves.
I'm scared today in our country how some ideas can have such strong support. Uh, global warming, 20 years ago, it came out and started gaining momentum, and there were the naysayers. But even now, where only the most blind person could deny that something's going on with climate change and human influence, we still have a high double-digit number of people that don't think there's an anthropogenic component, a human-induced component to climate change. Still denying it. The election deniers, if there's anything I've really come to realize in the last 5 years, it's keep saying something, and people want to believe it, be it a religious or political, particularly philosophy. Wow, even in an educated country, it'll sell. It'll sell big.
Repetition.
One day at a time.
Yes. One individual.
Jim here regularly gets letters to the editor, the Denver Post, that I read. So he's out there plugging. I read one this morning that I cut out that I thought did a good job of explaining why violence was on the uprise, the underlying factors. And I have to say, help get behind the political efforts that support your views. I was out yesterday morning walking for David Ortiz, trying to help him, the Belmar area. So. Other thoughts? Mhm.
Yeah, there was just. They went into, Ukraine. And nothing to do with it.
What are you gonna do for lunch?
Would you rather do tuna on salad? Sandwich.
Turkey sandwich.
Okay. We're gonna have salmon tonight.
Warning us about things
Mhm.
that we realize.
Okay, get on this if you want. Shit.
Well, it's time.
Slide 12 of 40.
He just went backwards on, but you can't hear I'd like to have heard Jim Watson's comments, but
Bring it on,
What are those?
I don't know what those mean.
That's Green Lantern's oath. In brightest day and blackest night, no evil shall escape my sight. But
Oh.
those who worship evil's might beware my power, Green Lantern's light.
Hmm.
Actually, some people didn't like, if you read the Green Lantern, if you read the Green Lantern comic books when I was a kid, there was a group of blue-skinned aliens on the planet OA that established this intergalactic police force, combat evil in the universe. And they had Green Lantern agents in many solar systems that would go out and combat evil and try to keep evil forces from prevailing. The original Green Lantern actually appeared in the 1940s. Then they phased out Alan Scott, the first Green Lantern, and then came back with the newer Green Lantern in 1959.
Oh,
I drive Alice nuts sometimes. She said, how can you go from reading nuclear physics 3 minutes later, you're reading Green Lantern comics?
Oh, that's good.
I love the cat and pickles, yeah. Okay, everybody. Right. Yeah. 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 Look at the, there's now eight districts in Colorado. Look at some of the key districts that could very well determine the balance of power in the House of Representatives. Look at the 8th district. They won't discard your money, though, I'll tell you that. Okay, everybody, thanks for coming this morning.
Thank you, Ron.
Okay,
Bye.
bye-bye. Let's see if I can stop recording here. Finish the slideshow. Yeah, watch Smokey and the Bandit. That's your homework. Guaranteed, you'll enjoy it. You'll enjoy it. Okay. Okay, everybody. Oh, which one were you? Okay. Okay. Just, in a few weeks. Yeah, you'll be back. Okay, I gotta find stop record. Let's see.